So how do you get your news? Well, you obviously listen to CBC, but other people might watch videos on TikTok. You might follow a few folks you agree or disagree with on social media platforms like Blue Sky, or you might subscribe to a bunch of big thinkers on Substack, and usually people who have a Substack, they also have a podcast. There are a lot of ways to stay informed, and this is really fractured traditional media. Now, is social media to blame for this? And if they are, what's the best way to handle that? Our guest today is Andrew Coyne, longtime national affairs columnist. We'll get his take on things. And then we'll also hear from the digital strategist who helped get Premier Brad Wall elected and someone from the Media Ecosystem Observatory. They conducted a recent study on the rise of political influencers. We hope you'll call with your thoughts today. How do you get your news? What do you make of the growing influence of influencers? Call 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. As you likely know, Andrew Coyne is a national affairs commentator. He's got columns in old school newspapers like the National Post and the Globe and Mail. You see him regularly on the National. Well, today he's in the Queen City to deliver the James Menifee Lecture at the University of Regina. But first, he's our guest on Blue Sky. Andrew Coyne, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So are you coming with positive or negative news when you speak tonight about the landscape of Canadian news media?
A little bit of both, I guess. First of all, the reports of our death, we, the traditional media, are greatly exaggerated, often by us. We tend to be a little bit self-involved at the best of times. We're not going anywhere. We're not about to disappear. We're going through a very difficult transition. We, particularly in the for-profit media, if you will, from an advertising finance base, which has historically been our basis for more than 100 years, to more a reader or viewer-based finance where the audience pays for it. That's a difficult transition. It means you've got to give people their money's worth. It means we got to pull up our socks and make a better product. But I think in the long term, that's a good news story. We're going to have a tighter relationship with our viewers and our readers. The bad news is that the less pleasant part is the rise of social media. Some of it is very positive. If there's 100 other influencers out there, quote unquote, so much the better. We shouldn't be worried about that so much. But the kind of sort of intellectual chaos of disinformation, misinformation, foreign bots, lunatics and crazoids clogging up the conversation, wanting to debate whether the Earth is flat or not. These things are much more problematic. There's no simple solution to them, but they are going to be with us for a long time to come. In a way, again, to circle back to the good news is, I think in the midst of all this chaos, people are learning that they need to, more than ever, to look for sources they can trust, people who are actually making the attempt. Nobody succeeds in it fully, but making the attempt to just report the facts as they see them. That's becoming, I think, more and more of a premium in the world that we're now in.
I want to ask you more about your personal experience within the media over the last number of years. Do you feel like you're reaching more people today, fewer people today? Like, did you start to notice a shift? I think you're right. People in the media we're constantly having this conversation. Like, are we reaching the masses? And I don't know if we always are, right? So what's your take on that? Do you feel like you're reaching more people because of all the different ways you can connect with them, or fewer people because they're not subscribing to the Globe? What are your thoughts?
Well, more people are reaching me, I can tell you that much. In the old days, if you wrote a column that was quote-unquote controversial, there might be a couple letters to the editor in the paper. Now, you get hundreds of people coming online to tell you what a horrible person you are. So you got to have some fairly thick skin. I worry about, columnists or reporters just starting out where they haven't necessarily built up that thick hide. If I'd been facing that when I first started, I don't know how I would have reacted. So
But do you have a thick skin now?
Oh,
I don't know if I do.
Well,
it still stings.
You have to learn. First of all, a lot of it really is probably, in some cases, literally bots. You can't take that too seriously. And even the others, so they call you names online. You can't really worry about that too much. And mostly I don't even read it. There was a time, Twitter, as it was then called, going back maybe 10 years, was still kind of fun. And you had interesting exchanges with readers. Those are few and far between now. Mostly I don't engage because what's the point? So mostly I use it to keep track of sort of what's the buzz, what are people talking about, what's the argument of the day, is there something I can add to that conversation, because that's ultimately what you want to make your column about is making a useful contribution to discussions that are taking place.
But how much are you creating, though, on social media sites these days? Like I know you used to be active on Twitter. Do you have a Substack? Like, how are you using all these other platforms these days?
I have a Substack sort of, I don't know. It's there. I haven't done anything on it yet. Maybe I will eventually. Mostly Twitter, because there's just so many of the damned networks that who has the time? So I waste enough time on Twitter. Mostly I just post stories that are of interest to me that I think would be helpful to people to understanding what's going on. Occasionally I comment on it. As I say, very rarely do I actually reply to a comment.
What gives you the sense, though, that people are eager and have an appetite right now to find solid, reliable sources of information? Like, I think I kind of came here today thinking, and the bulk of the conversation we'll have in our next half hour will be about the rise of influencers and how they share political commentary and how younger people are gravitating towards that. But what tells you that people have an appetite for traditional news? Like, what gives you the sense that that's for real?
Well, when we say people, it's some people. Mm-hmm. And let's be clear, there's only ever been a minority of people who read anything. And there's only ever been a minority of those that read anything worth reading. So we're always dealing with the minority of the minority. But there will always be that minority. There's always going to be a section of the population that wants to be informed, that needs to be informed. And certainly you can try to address those folks. There's a penumbra of people outside of them who are mildly interested, mildly committed to the facts, and maybe with, if you give them what they need, you can engage them further. You can draw them further into the fact-based world. There is a section of the community, I think relatively small in Canada, but relatively large in the United States, that has just departed altogether from any interest in a fact-based world. They are living in the world that they prefer to live in, and why not? It's so much more fun to believe in whatever you want to believe in than to actually be limited to dull old reality. That's a much larger project in trying to figure out how to bring those people back on board. Do you think about those people when you're writing your column? Like, I know you're just one national affairs commentator, but are you thinking about bringing them into the tent? Are you addressing them in your writing? You can't address everybody. You should certainly be trying to address yourself to people who don't already agree with you. If all you're doing is preaching to the converted, you're not doing very much, in my opinion. So I do try to frame my arguments in a way that can be persuasive to somebody who, at this point, disagrees with me. Can I frame the argument for somebody who just, thinks the media are all liars and in cahoots with the child pornographers or whatever? No, I can't. So we say you have to cast a wide enough net that you're actually adding something to the conversation. But if you try to reach everybody, you're going to defeat yourself.
Do you think about the younger generation? Like, I'm wondering how age plays into this conversation. Do you feel like you're talking to young people?
I don't try to speak to either old people or young people. I'll let them, all I can do is try to make my argument as reasonable as I can. I'll have to let other people, first of all, let them pigeonhole me as they wish, as to whatever, viewpoint they think I'm coming from. And to some extent, you have to let your readers select themselves. I don't think you can chase after demographics. It's hard enough just writing a column that will attract people's interest for 3 minutes. That's a really hard thing to do. And I think if you try to think about what demographic am I reaching, in my opinion, I think you're just giving yourself too many tasks at once.
I want to hear more of your thinking on just the number of people who are out there maybe adding to the noise. And like you said, yes, it can add to the disinformation, and there's a lot of it's a bit chaotic right now. But the positive side of having so many people have access to platforms where they can share their perspective. Yeah. Like everyone has a podcast these days. So what is the benefit of that?
So the positive side is you open up discussions that might have previously been subject to media groupthink. And that really used to be more of a problem, I think, than it is today. It still exists, but because we tend to be heard like at times. But there's just so many more avenues now to disrupt that. So somebody of good faith who comes to their opinion honestly and it departs from the orthodoxy, good. Let's let all these 100 flowers bloom, and we'll see which ideas, the marketplace of ideas, quote unquote. But there's a lot of bad faith actors out there. There's a lot of people who are simply not interested in serious engagement with ideas, who are spreading material falsehoods, oftentimes with malicious intent, and it's very hard to separate the one from the other. We're in a very different world than the previous centuries, where to get access to a mass audience, you could always stand on a street corner and yell. But if you wanted access to a mass audience in the past, you had to go through the quote-unquote gatekeepers, people who owned printing presses or broadcast networks, et cetera, and people who had reputations to defend and businesses to run, and who weren't going to give a platform to lunatics or to racists or Nazis. Well, all of that's fallen down now. So anybody, anywhere, can broadcast to the entire world instantaneously at zero cost and with no intermediation, no lawyers, no editors, no fact checkers. That is, there's upsides to that, but there's a lot of downsides.
So whose fault is it, or how? I think a lot of people jump to the conclusion that the social media companies are to blame, that they've allowed people like that, they've given them a platform, and there's not enough regulation. But what's your take on that?
I think there's a lot of truth in that. The platforms, when they first came along, whether out of sincere belief or was in their economic interest, probably a bit of both, said, well, we don't want to have any content moderation. We're not a publisher. We're just like the phone company, and you wouldn't moderate or regulate people's phone calls. That's just simply not true. They are publishers. Now, I don't want the government regulating content or getting anywhere near content other than the really limited exceptions to free speech that basically we already have. But I do think there's a role for looking at the sort of industry structure. The big problem with the social media networks is that they're kind of quasi-monopolies. They lock you in because, you're on that network because everybody else is, and you're loath to leave that network because if you do, you lose your audience. And so people have tried to start up competing networks to Twitter, for example, to X as it's now called. Blue Sky, et cetera. I don't get the sense that they've had a huge momentum because of this lock-in effect. Well, there's a Canadian tech writer, Cory Doctorow, who's proposed a sort of a mandatory interoperability between the networks. Make it so that if I leave a network and go to another one, my audience on the original network can still see my posts. And so you lower the costs of exit, and that way you can try and get some useful competition going between the networks. If people feel like this network is not doing a good job of moderating, either because they're being too strict or not strict enough, then they can go to another network where they feel like they've struck a better balance. And maybe, and I don't want to invest too much in this, but maybe through that process we can kind of nudge them towards some better approach where we're not, automatically giving license to as I say, Nazis and literal flat earthers. You can go online, I promise you, and find dozens of extremely well-made videos patiently explaining that the world is flat. Should we, free speech, everybody should be able to do that if they want to, but do people who own these networks have a responsibility to not just spread out and out lies? And I think they do.
That idea that you have and that you share, that Cory Doctorow has, that you share with him, would social media companies go for that? Like, I don't know if I fully understand the business structure of things, and I think my understanding is if I'm sick of X and I want to start posting on Blue Sky, my followers come with me. The posts are still there. It's not, because I know what you mean. I would love to leave some, but then I'm like losing everybody.
So the basic way it works is the new networks are all in favor of it, and the old networks are all against it. So this is, I would absolutely say, this is a regulatory matter. But that would be the extent of it. You would not get into the government deciding what's true and what's false, what's offensive, what's not offensive, because I don't think we want to go anywhere near that.
In the meantime, for the average person, are we just supposed to make peace with the fact that people can do this, and then that people follow them and they believe it's true? Like, is this just the reality now?
I think to a large extent, the genie is out of the bottle. It's going to be very difficult to regain that sort of gatekeeper model I was describing. In a sense, what we're talking about with that doctrine model is we at least get our choice of gatekeepers. At least we get, we don't have the government, the single monopolistic power of the government doing it, but we get different kind of quasi-regulators within their own universe, and you can kind of pick and choose which one you find the best. But no, I don't see how you can suddenly get people back on side with reality. I think we have a long-term project as a society to restore the process of this, what you might call the socialization of knowledge. This idea that we learn stuff from people who know more stuff than we do, that we're not all just trying to figure out on our own, but we're working together. The real one of the main problems with social media is this idea that people can, quote unquote, do their own research. All they need is Google, and they can relitigate every known fact every day. And we can't. We have to be able to take certain things as given, at least as a sort of an operating hypothesis, so we can have focused and useful discussions about the things that are really current and facing us. So somehow this is, as I say, a much larger project, is trying to get people back into the idea of there are people who know more than me. I need to talk to them and learn from them. And that gets into social structures and, the degree to which people are isolated from each other, all these kinds of things that are much larger than just new media or old media.
Yeah. Interesting. I do want to ask you, though, about how much of an impact the Meta news ban has had on all of this. Like, on one hand, we put a lot of emphasis on the fact that, well, traditional media is not in those spaces. So how can people get the facts if they're not seeing a news link in their social media feed? But the U.S. doesn't have a Meta ban. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, how big of an impact was it to lose that access for Canadian news media outlets to lose that access to social media?
It seems to have been huge, and it's all our own fault. We as an industry reared up on our hind legs and said, we're outraged. We're outraged that Facebook and Google and these people are, quote unquote, stealing our content, and we want the government to stop it. What was the stealing our content? They were posting links to our pages that, in fact, we told our readers to post. Because, in fact, we benefit from that. We every time somebody posts a link on Facebook, it directs more readers to our pages. But, we were in the mood that we wanted to take Facebook's money and have it directed to us. So we got the government to bring in this ban effectively. What they said was, we're going to effectively tax you every time you link to these pages. It's insane. And Facebook looked at this and went, okay, so we'll stop. So they stopped, and then we screamed even louder because now they weren't sending readers to our pages anymore. So it's a huge self-inflicted wound. It accounts, I think, for some of the rise in alternate influencers, if you will, that if people aren't getting their news from mainstream sources, they're going to get them from other sources. So, I just think it's one of the worst self-inflicted regulatory blows that we could have imagined.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and definitely can attribute some of the rise of the extremists to that. But again, in the U.S., they can still, traditional media outlets can still post. So
yeah. Well, the states, for a lot of reasons, has a much more entrenched sociological problem of mistrust of everybody. They already we have to an extent as well, this sort of social divide between higher educated, higher social capital people, coastal elites, as they say in the States, versus less educated, more conservative, more rural people. Huge distrust along that line to start with. Then they have this series of traumas that they've gone through from 9/11 to the financial market collapse to, the Iraq War, et cetera, that encourage people to believe nobody in charge knows anything, the experts are all idiots, et cetera. Then you layer on top of that social media, and it just adds more corrosiveness and distrust. And then you had the President of the United States, who lies several hundred times a day and just basically persuades everybody that nobody's telling the truth about anything. The States is in a terrible state. All the Western democracies are wrestling with these issues to an extent, but in the United States, as with most things, they take everything much further than anybody else does.
And we're wrestling with it too, maybe not to the same extent. But how can we combat that distrust here in Canada? And I mean, you are the Menifee lecturer tonight, so I think there is a message probably that you're giving to young journalists who are hoping to kind of try and tackle this really big issue. So how can we combat that?
Well, first of all, understanding that that's a residual strength. It is still the case in this country. I mean, we've had long experience with regional divides, but we don't have quite the same entrenched social divides in the United States. We're still talking to each other. We don't think each other is the enemy. We don't seek revenge when we get into power. But it's corroding at the edges. I will say, I think our democratic institutions which have fallen into deep disrepair, are something that we need to focus on. That institutional bulwarks, a stronger parliament where we really think our MPs are actually representing us, where we really think the government is being held to account by that parliament, and not everything's being run out of the Prime Minister's office. All these things are important in themselves, but I think they also come to the question of helping to keep us talking in the same conversation together, helping to bridge those divides before they become unbridgeable.
Would you go into journalism today if you were younger and this was a choice you were making?
I think so, because it was never about, where was I going to make the most money. It just seemed like the thing that was most congenial. It was, frankly, it was the sort of thing I was doing while I figured out what else I was going to do. Here I am all these years later. It's still the case. But it's tough. It's very tough, and it's also different and better in some ways. When I was starting out, you were trying to find a job, nobody could see your work. You could send it in to the employer, but basically, nobody, until you were published, nobody published you. Now you can post on a Substack. You can post on social media. You can at least get your stuff out there. And I know it's really tough because, the industry's in such a terrible state. But the good side is at least you can get your stuff out there. And if you do, chances are somebody's going to see it, and you can start to build a reputation and a following.
Andrew, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. I'm so glad you could make some time for us and enjoy the talk tonight.
The pleasure was all mine.
That is Andrew Coyne. He's a national affairs commentator. After a 5-year hiatus, the James M. Menifee Lecture at the University of Regina is back, and Andrew Coyne is delivering that lecture. It takes place tonight, 7:30, at the Education Auditorium at the University of Regina. I'll share one email here from Keith, who writes, "It starts with education and critical thinking combined with an open mind, respect of others, and humility. Good luck." Keith, thank you. We have more to come here on Blue Sky. We're going to be meeting Derek Robinson. He's the founder and CEO of MASH Media, but he actually was the chief of digital strategy for Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall from 2011 to 2018. So we'll pick his brain a bit to find out the social media strategy that was used then and what insight he has into how politicians are working the networks today. And then we'll also meet someone who was part of a study with the Media Ecosystem Observatory. It was a collaboration between McGill University and the University of Toronto to see how much influence influencers have in the political realm. So that's coming up. I'm Leisha Grabinski. You are listening to Blue Sky on CBC Radio 1. A new report shows younger Canadians are getting a lot of their political news from social media influencers. The authors say on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, and Blue Sky, influencers now reach more people than traditional news outlets. The Media Ecosystem Observatory is a collaboration between McGill University and the University of Toronto. Its researchers found that almost 2/3 of the political content Canadians see online come from these influencers. Do you trust the news you find through social media? Who do you turn to for the latest information? We hope you'll join the conversation today. Call 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. And in a moment, we'll be hearing from the Chief of Digital Strategy for former Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall. We'll get to him in a bit. But let's start with Zainab Payvan with the Media Ecosystem Observatory at McGill University. She is one of the lead authors on this study. Zainab, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. You were listening to Andrew Coyne. I want to get your reaction to that, but I also just want to lay a bit of for you to explain the landscape a little bit and what you learned through this study. What does it tell us about how Canadians are getting their political news these days?
Okay, our research found that, as you also said, political influencers now drive over half of the political content and nearly 2/3 of all engagement in Canada's online information ecosystem. It means more attention than politicians and news outlets combined together. So we are kind of witnessing here a structural shift from institution to individuals. Okay, political communication is no longer dominated by newsrooms or parties, but it's fragmented across networks of influencers. So we can also say in 2025 today, Canadians online are more likely to see a political opinion or a news from an influencer than from a news outlet or from a politician.
And Zainab, I'm wondering if you can define or how are you defining what an influencer is?
Thank you very much. Because most of the time when we think about influencers, we are thinking about life influencers, beauty influencers, But what we are working on here that we call political influencers. And for us, these are individuals or groups who constantly produce political content online and have the capacity to shape political opinion in the Canadian information ecosystem. Just an example, Andrew
Coyne.
Andrew was one of them, yeah.
So Andrew Coyne would be considered a political influencer.
Exactly, yeah.
And why? Because he's because he's online, because he's got a column in the Globe and Mail, because it's on the National, or is it just because of what he's saying publicly, no matter what the platform is?
In fact, political influencers, according to our definition, it can be journalists, commentators, and academicians, but they are regularly producing political content online on their own account. I mean, some journalists are related to some news channel, for example, CBC or so, or another one, but they have their personal accounts also by saying that these are my personal accounts, these ideas are not relevant to my institution, my news outlet, etc. So we are considering them also as political influencers.
So anyone from Saskatchewan on your radar that would be considered a political influencer?
Probably yes, but we prefer not to give all the names because as Andrew was invited, I thought that it was interesting to say also that he was one of them.
But can you give us a sense of anybody in Saskatchewan, or even what platform, or just anything that gives us an idea of who's making?
I don't have this information right now, but we have from each province influencers.
Okay. So why does this matter? Why? I guess that's the big question. Why does knowing all of this matter?
Because, as we said, it's important to see how people are getting information, how people are creating their political ideas, because it's shaping the Canadian political environment. For example, what's happening now is we did the survey, okay? According to our survey, 48% of Canadians under 25 years old, of course, who use social media, they consume news from political influencers. But the news coming from political influencers is not just raw content. It's coming with the interpretation of the influencer. So the young people are not just getting news, but getting a commentary layer and engaging with this commentary layer by doing by consuming, by retweeting, etc.
So you're already getting, if you're paying attention to these influencers, you're getting a perspective on the story and their perspective. Exactly. And so then I'm wondering how that affects critical thinking, that if you were to come across multiple perspectives, you might have to figure out for yourself, well, what do you actually think? But you're being fed one take.
Okay. In fact, another survey showed that because we asked people, to Canadians, when did you first came across an influencer? Okay, 32 of them said that it's recommended by family or friends. Okay, but 32 of them said that it's recommended by social media platform. You see, so if it's recommended by social media platform, okay, you started to follow, and then you are going to get another recommendation based on your reactions, your engagements, etc. So it will start to create, I don't want to say echo chambers, but kind of closed communities. So you are just going to follow the people, political influencers who are just sharing the same idea and making attention to the same political news. And you are getting used to not to do so much critical thinking. Like, I really like the email. The only thing we should do is that we should help educate people and trying to say to them that be aware, okay? Don't stop critical thinking.
the email we got from Keith. I would encourage more people to email us today. You can also call us with your thoughts. Where do you get your news and what do you make of the rise of political influencers? 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. I'm speaking with Zainab Payvan. She's the lead author on the study that comes from the Media Ecosystem Observatory. Her focus is on the rise of political influencers. Well, what about the politicians? Derek Robinson is the founder and CEO of MASH Strategy, and his team works with businesses, politicians, nonprofits who need help getting their message out. He's also the former chief of digital strategy for Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall from 2011 to 2018. And Derek, like all good social media users, he's also a co-host of a podcast. It is called Frickin' Good Politics, and now he's on Blue Sky. Derek, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So I want you to take us back to 2011, so long ago. How important was social media to Brad Wall's success as a politician?
It was hugely successful. And I remember it sort of started, I was highly influenced by Barack Obama and what he did there. He was sort of the first major politician that did it quite well, and showing really Barack's personality and who he was as a human being. And then I remember talking to Brad early on. I worked at the Saskatchewan Party office before the Premier's office. And I said, Brad, you got a good personality. You should sort of get this out there a little bit more. And he's like, why would I do that? It was sort of the first response. And I said, well, I think people really like it. And it'll show people that you're this kind of down to earth guy that loves football and the riders. And then, it kind of took off from there. And we did all sorts of crazy things. I remember one of the first things we did was after that 2011 election, we had a bloopers video that we had, and it was just him messing up all of his commercials for that campaign. And I remember, when we were talking about it, it's like, we can't release this. This is crazy. People are going to use it to attack us and do different things. And but it turned out to be a big viral success. And we did a fun thing where the Banjo Bowl video, people might remember that, when there was a Banjo Bowl coming up, and Brad Wall was playing a banjo in the Premier's office, and he had the famous line where he said, I practice a lot, but it turns out I'm just not very good at playing the banjo. Kind of like the Bombers at football. And that went viral on TSN on social media. And that was like the first time I saw something kind of go viral politically. That was sort of the fun way. I find most of the stuff these days is very emotional and a lot of anger. But that was sort of the fun, lighthearted stuff.
Thanks for taking us back to the good old days, Derek. So let's talk about the current moment that we're in. A lot has shifted. Just how plugged in are you right now? I just want to know a little bit more about you, your company, and are you actively working with any politicians?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of people in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and on the federal scene as well. We're very known for being part of the conservative movement, so ties into the Conservative Party and working with Pierre Poilievre and many others.
Okay, so what are the conversations that are happening right now around social media? I can totally picture 2011 and trying to convince a younger Brad Wall that this was a strategic move to be posting on social media. What are the conversations happening right now?
Well, I'll say at a federal level, I don't think this is a big secret or anything, but I'm personally trying to convince people at a federal level to do more traditional media. I feel like that's a gap that's actually missing. I feel like in the last election, Mark Carney and the Liberal Party did a much better job cultivating traditional media, and I still think it has a lot of power. And that has to be something we don't avoid, because I found Pierre Poilievre went very heavy into the political influencer scene. So, he got criticized for this a number of times, of going on YouTube shows like The Northern Perspective or The Pleb Reporter, very, well followed, influential political influencers in their shows. And I think those are very powerful. I remember seeing Justin Trudeau when he was sort of, going down in his leadership. He tried to sort of revitalize his image, going on, a bunch of friendly sort of left-wing social media influencers, their podcasts, their online shows. And I think that actually helped him quite a bit. And so for me, I like a balanced approach where you have strong interviews and strong relationships with traditional media. So I'm kind of from the Brad Wall School of Politics of having great relationships with traditional media. The federal conservatives, they have a lot of skepticism towards traditional media, and I don't think that does them any good. for the most part. And so I like a great balance. It's like you have great relationships with traditional media, but also you're finding new opportunities to go on these unique podcasts, these unique followings, and do collaborations and provide time for this.
Okay, collaborations. I want you to peel back the curtain just a little bit.
Sure.
So if a politician is trying to get his or her message out and they want to tap an influencer to help them promote that message, what might that relationship look like? Like, are people paid to promote political messages, that sort of thing?
No, it's not that. It's just giving them time, essentially. So, for example, Jordan Peterson, who's a very well-known person, influencer in Canada, but obviously around the world now. There was sort of a discussion that, hey, we should do a show together, and that was sort of a famous show before the last election. Was Pierre Poilievre and Jordan Peterson that went viral, and got an insane amount of views. So even just that YouTube video was significant, but then basically all the political influencers across Canada and the world, they picked up little clips from all this, and those things went viral. And the one thing I found, even just doing this a little bit myself, is I remember I took some of those clips and just put them on. I said, hey, I thought this was an interesting comment. And even though I don't have a lot of followers on TikTok or some of my other channels, they went viral for me. And the thing I sort of learned from that, and listening to social media influencers like Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a big deal personality in the States, is that you don't even need a following anymore to go viral with these things. The algorithm is so good at finding the people that agree with you and are part of that echo chamber that you don't even need a large following. It helps to have a large following, but even without a large following, I was able to get hundreds of thousands of views on clips of shows from other influencers. So I thought that was an interesting observation.
So, yeah, that is an interesting observation. And what's the learning from that for people who are looking to get elected? Because like this is it can be a little bit dangerous, like a little bit of a slippery slope. Yep. And if we're all just looking for clicks, and if rage tends to get a bit more attention than other things, like what's the lesson that you've really learned from that?
Yeah. So, a couple things. First is you can't go too heavy into the rage. People in the industry call it rage farming. There's a reason to do it, because politicians are trying to get voter IDs. That's how you win, is you ID your vote, and then you drive those people out to vote. And so if you can get them motivated on an issue because they're angry about something, it's a very powerful motivator. But so is hope. So it's basically any emotion. People make decisions and take action when they have strong emotion. So anger is a very easy emotion to leverage, but hope, positivity, those things can be great as well. Again, coming from the Bradwell School of Politics, he was very much about hope and positivity and a vision for a strong Saskatchewan and a Saskatchewan on the rise. That works. Barack Obama was the same way. But we've kind of come in the infrastructure of Canada and U.S. politics, as Andrew Coyne was very articulately talking about. It's very, rage baity and lying and all sorts of interesting things to motivate people nowadays. And the problem is that it works. So, I think any politician, you have to leverage that to some extent, but I think you'll also find if you do that too much, you could end up losing, and people just think, oh, this person's always negative. They're always so angry. That's a huge problem.
But if you want to be a politician today, do you have to have a presence on social media? Like, sure, you have to appear on podcasts. Yes, you should probably do interviews with CBC. But do you need to have your own online persona as a politician these days?
I think for a leader, absolutely. I think if you're a backbencher MLA or MP, no. I know lots of them.
Would it be discouraged for backbenchers to maybe not be on social media so much?
No, I encourage them to. When I talk to them and I help them with their branding or whatever else, I say you need to have a personality. Here's the thing: people like human beings. We're very strange that way. It's like I don't want a person that's just sending me newsletters. I want to know who this human being actually is. I like to say, show somebody your personality. What are your personal interests? That's what Bradwell was great at. He always talked about his love for country music, and obviously his boy is a country music star and all that, but he loves football and he coached football. That was one of the famous ads that I think got Brad elected initially, was him being a football coach in South Kern. And that showed a different side of him. Then people were very scared and skeptical of him because the Sask party was new and scary and all these different things. And that sort of humanized him. So I support the humanization of people on social media. And I think all politicians should do that.
Is that the best way, though, to get information out? So, yes, I can understand wanting to humanize a politician, but I'm wondering if you have thoughts on this movement where we see politicians putting out news on their Facebook with a video instead of holding a more traditional press conference.
Yeah, I think it helps. I encourage that as well. But again, I think you should do both things. It's like it's not one or the other, it's both. So it's like, yes, you should put a great video out on social media. The one thing I encourage is when cabinet ministers or premiers are doing big announcements, is they should have a bit of an explainer video to go with their announcement. Like, explain why on earth you're doing this to the public. The thing I often hear about politicians that they complain about is like, we're doing all these great things, but nobody understands or knows about it. Well, it's like, yeah, you put out a press release and that's great. And you did a news conference and that's great, but that's only going to do so much. You have this amazing opportunity to talk to hundreds of thousands of people, make a strong explainer video as to why you're doing it. Because, governments have good reasons of why they do things. They just don't explain the why very well. They just say, here's the announcement.
And, and in a more traditional format, if you were to do that on a morning show or to even just have a press conference, that politician has to be prepared to take some tough questions from journalists. And that's a value to the public. And I hear from you that you're on board with that. But how do you convince maybe more skeptical, people within the Conservative Party right now that this is like hugely important for democracy?
I think they know that. It's just sort of a mentality at the federal level that it's like the media is not to be trusted. And again, I don't agree with that. I think everyone has a job and they're doing their job. But I think it's, they lost that election because of boomers, and boomers have a very strong affinity for traditional media. They listen to it, I think, more than anybody else. So the younger Canadians have gone away from it quite a bit. But boomers are still there. So if they want to get elected, they have to play this game, and the infrastructure is still very strong that way. So I'm sort of encouraging them, saying it doesn't do you any good to make enemies. I'm in my political career, in my business career, it's like, make friends, not enemies. Why am I making more enemies than I need to?
What do you think the future looks like, Derek? I know you don't have a crystal ball, and I am curious about like some big topics, like how might artificial intelligence shape sort of the posts that we see, like what. And I started off by asking you, what's the conversation right now? Like what are the coming things that both politicians and the public sort of need to be aware of?
I would say more political influencers becoming politicians. I'm seeing it more and more. So I have a couple friends who are MPs now, Matt Strauss and Aaron Gunn, who are very strong, conservative political influencers. They're now MPs. And so I think we're going to see more of that. And I think you're going to see politicians acting more like political influencers. And so obviously you're seeing that with Trump and his crazy, posts that he posts on Truth and long diatribes about different things in all caps. That's all happening already. And I think you're just going to see more and more and more of that.
Does anything worry you, Derek? Lots of things.
I think no one knows what's real and what's not real anymore. I think that frightens me. The one thing I was going to say, and my wife actually was telling me about this, that what she does is she gets her news from TikTok and influencers on TikTok, which I think is fine and good. But the nice thing is she balances it. So what you can do is you can train your algorithm so you can see both sides. You don't get stuck in that echo chamber. And
how do you train your algorithm to do that?
So you don't, if you disagree with someone, you don't just swipe away right away. You actually watch it. You consume the information, because it's like, you should understand the other side. I think, for me, democracy is understanding both sides and both sides sharing their opinions. And that's how we somehow have a good society. So what people typically do is they like the post and they watch the full thing of the thing they agree with, but the thing they don't agree with, they just swipe away right away. Well,
or they unfollow.
Yeah, exactly. Or unfollow it. But it's like the algorithm's always going to feed you different things to see what you're interested in. And so, but if you're swiping away with the people that disagree with you, that'll send a signal to the algorithm that, oh, you're not interested in this and I shouldn't give you this anymore. You receive what you demand on these algorithms. So if you want both sides, watch both sides. You'll get fed it at some point in the algorithm. Just don't swipe away. And then also don't like and follow all the right-wing political influencers, all the left-wing political influencers, because then you're just going to get that, and then you're not going to really have a good balanced approach.
Fascinating. Derek, don't go anywhere. I just want to bring Zainab back into the conversation because she's been listening, and I'm sure she has thoughts. Zainab, just listening to Derek and getting that insight into how politicians are using social media and all of this, what are some things that are top of mind for you right now?
I totally agree about this emotion thing, because we also observe that political influencers are getting so much attention because they are emotional, they are fast, they are providing personalized ideas. So it corresponds well when he said personalization of social media accounts, adding some feelings, adding some human side, and it works, and that gets attention.
Yeah. And Zainab, listening, is there anything that concerns you? I mean, we heard about Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre kind of doing the circuit and maybe not appearing in front of more traditional journalists. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in fact, I believe that political influencers are getting this much attention and getting a huge place in our information ecosystem, shows also the health of our information ecosystems. But the problem is there is no formal accountability around. We don't know if you said someone is paid to promote some political ideas, and we don't know how the algorithms work. So we need some transparency about these subjects. And on the other hand, I think this is a kind of, we have some new democratic challenges, like I said, accountability, disinformation, misinformation, creating some echo chambers. But we should also see this shift that political influencers are getting more attention, like new opportunities, because it can also open the doors to grassroots mobilization, diverse voices, and direct citizen engagement. So we shouldn't only see the half of the glass, It's also something nice, and it shows the health of the system.
And Zainab, you kind of touched on this already, but what has this done to our critical thinking skills, watching news with the take already built in?
Exactly. I think it's always happening when we use the AI. It's happening when we ask AI to write our emails. It's just almost the same thing. We should just be aware that we are not consuming the raw news. We are not getting the raw news directly. And if we can, as Derek also said, try to follow the opposite ideas also, and try to understand, you can follow a political influencer. You can say that, this person thinks like me, I like the interpretation, but it shouldn't be correct for all the subject and all the events, So we shouldn't fall into a kind of, I like it, but we need to filter. We need to think about it before engaging with it.
And in general, Derek, what do you think of the rise of political influencers? Like, I appreciate, obviously, I'm a journalist, but I appreciate the fact that you still see the importance of traditional media. But what do you think of the rise of political influencers like this?
Yeah, I think there's good and bad, but I think it's actually quite interesting. Like I like the idea of people getting engaged and being able to act like this is a career path for people now. I think we forget about this. So it's like, I don't think these people are typically getting paid to create this content, but they get paid because they get so many views, and YouTube will pay them, and other people will pay them, and they'll get sponsorships. Like I know I have friends that have done this, that have created quite good companies because they've started with politics, and it's led them to creating some sort of a mock news or some sort of a news organization, but then also it'll help them create a business too. So one of my friends is Anthony Kosh, who writes for the National Post and different people. So he's a strong influencer on the conservative side, but then he also writes, and then that sort of feeds his business work as well. So I like citizens engaging. I just don't like when people don't see the other side. I think that's my biggest thing, is like, if you're only consuming one type of content, it's a real harm to democracy and a real harm to your own self-worth and self-being, I think, because you're just not going to understand anyone else. And again, the biggest thing about democracy is this clash of ideas, but you have to hear the other side. Yeah. And that's a really important part of it.
This has been a great conversation today. Derek, I'm so glad we had a chance to talk. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
And Zainab, thanks to you too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. That's Zainab Payvan, lead author on the study that we've been talking about from the Media Ecosystem Observatory, and also Derek Robinson, who's founder and CEO of MASH Media. He was the chief of digital strategy for Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall from 2011 until 2018.